What if the First World War, the so-called war to end all wars, hadn't brought peace, but simply paused humanity's descent into another storm? Imagine a world where empires crumble overnight, monarchs vanish, and democracy rises from the rubble, not as salvation, but as the spark for an even greater fire. The story of World War I is not merely a story of victory and defeat. It is the death of an old world and the birth of an unstable new one. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, Europe was a graveyard of empires. The German, Austrian, Ottoman, and Russian monarchies, once symbols of divine power and unshakable order, lay in ruin. From their ashes emerged fragile democracies and newborn nations that would soon discover how dangerous freedom could be. The victors called it peace, but as Marshal Ferdinand Foch of France warned, this is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. He was right. The war had not healed Europe, it had only drained its blood. Economies shattered, millions dead, entire generations lost. The same powers that had ruled the world through colonies and conquests were now shadows of themselves. Factories stood silent, currencies collapsed, and the illusion of European superiority began to crumble. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, colonial soldiers who had fought bravely for their European masters returned home not to medals but to discrimination. They had marched under the same flags, shed the same blood, and yet were denied the freedom they had helped defend.
Their anger would become the seed of something unstoppable, waves of independence movements that would, over decades, dismantle the old colonial order piece by piece. Yet before that reckoning came, Europe itself was already splintering. Germany's original plan, the Schlieffen Plan, was meant to be a swift, precise strike, crush France, then pivot east to defeat Russia. But the war dragged on longer than anyone imagined, and part of that failure began inside Austria-Hungary. The empire, a patchwork of nations and languages, was already cracking. Political tensions between Vienna and Budapest deepened with every passing year. Austria dreamed of overseas colonies and imperial grandeur, while Hungary refused to finance what it saw as pointless ambition. Even the army reflected the divide. Three separate forces, the Common Army, the Imperial Royal Landwehr, and the Royal Hungarian Honved, each competing for resources and loyalty. Funds that should have modernized a single unified military were instead split and wasted. The Common Imperial Army suffered the worst of it, poor rations, outdated weapons, and an officer corps burdened by bureaucracy. The empire had not fought a major war in half a century, and its military machine had grown rusty and complacent. The occupation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the late 19th century had already exposed its weakness. 200,000 men were needed to secure a territory falling apart after the Ottoman retreat. Within the ranks, the diversity that once gave Austria-Hungary its cultural richness now turned into chaos. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Italians, Serbs, Poles, Romanians, and Ukrainians all served together, but few could even understand one another. Orders were often lost in translation, so the empire invented a simplified language known as Army Slavic, a desperate attempt to bridge communication among the ranks. Still, words could not unite a nation so divided. Transporting men and material across the empire was a nightmare. The rail system was outdated, with critical routes still single-tracked and vulnerable to collapse. Supply lines frequently broke down, leaving soldiers hungry and stranded. On the Eastern Front, where the empire faced Russia's vast armies, these problems turned deadly. The Germans, their supposed allies, were forced to send more troops eastward to compensate for Austria-Hungary's inefficiency, straining their own offensive in the west. But even within this dysfunction, change was stirring. The occupation of Bosnia had revealed an uncomfortable truth: modernization was no longer optional. Around 1903, the ambitious Berlin-Baghdad railway project offered Austria-Hungary a lifeline. Designed to connect Germany with the Ottoman Empire, it passed directly through Austrian territory. Suddenly, rail expansion became a national priority. New routes crisscrossed the heart of the empire, turning backwater provinces into industrial hubs. For the first time in decades, the empire's arteries began to flow freely. Trains moved faster, commerce thrived, and Austria-Hungary briefly seemed on the verge of rebirth.
Though it never matched the economic might of Germany or Britain, the modernization injected a sense of pride and purpose, the illusion that perhaps the dual monarchy could still stand among Europe's giants. When the storm of 1914 broke, Austria-Hungary entered the war more prepared than the world expected. On the Eastern Front, its armies held against the Russians with surprising resilience. This gave Germany the confidence to commit fewer divisions eastward and focus the bulk of its might on the Western Front, a decision that changed history. The Schlieffen Plan was unleashed in full force. German armies swept through Belgium, crossing its fields and cities with brutal precision. Their objective, to encircle and crush France before it could fully mobilize. Then came the Battle of the Marne, the heart of the storm. French and British troops fought desperately to block the German advance, and for a brief moment it seemed they might succeed. But the German counterattack shattered their lines. A gap opened, and the unstoppable tide rolled toward Paris. By late September, German troops stood on the banks of the Seine. The City of Light, symbol of Western civilization, fell under the iron shadow of the Kaiser's empire. Factories, ports, and supply hubs across northern France fell with it. Britain's forces, bleeding and broken, withdrew across the Channel. Morale in France collapsed. By New Year's Day 1915, even the generals admitted the truth. The war was lost. Under immense public pressure and political chaos, the French government sought peace. Negotiations began in Frankfurt, echoing the humiliating Treaty of 1871. Once again, German banners flew over Paris, and once again, France paid the price. The Treaty of Frankfurt redrew Europe's map. Luxembourg was annexed outright, Belgium became a German protectorate, and vast portions of northern France, rich in coal and iron, were absorbed into the Reich. France was forced into the German-led Mitteleuropa economic bloc, its independence reduced to a shadow. Reparations totaled 10 billion marks. Even France's colonies, though still under French administration, were now bound to German trade. The British Royal Navy refused to acknowledge the treaty and retreated to defend what colonies it could, but the war in Europe was over. And because it ended so swiftly, there was no Zimmermann telegram, no US intervention, no Allied resurgence. The United States, untouched by war, turned inward, bound by the Monroe Doctrine, uninterested in foreign entanglements. Without America's entry, there would be no Versailles Treaty, no League of Nations, no post-war world order as we know it. Instead, there would be a Europe united under German dominance, victorious, powerful, and dangerously confident. And history teaches one enduring truth: a triumphant empire is often the most unstable force of all. By the dawn of 1915, the map of Europe was changing faster than anyone could comprehend. Serbia, the small kingdom whose defiance had sparked the entire war, finally collapsed under the crushing weight of Austrian and German offensives. In February 1915, Belgrade fell, its flags torn down and replaced with the double eagle of the Habsburg Empire. The Balkans, once the powder keg of Europe, were now firmly in the grasp of Vienna. The victory came at a cost. The Russians, humiliated by the fall of their Slavic ally, burned with rage. They viewed France's separate negotiations with Germany as a betrayal of both friendship and honor. The Tsar ordered his armies to fight to the last man, but it was a hopeless demand. The Central Powers unleashed a lightning offensive across the east. German artillery thundered across the plains of Poland. Austro-Hungarian divisions pressed through Galicia. Prussian cavalry reached the outskirts of Vilnius. Within months, southern Lithuania, western Poland, and the Baltic states fell into enemy hands. Then came an even greater surprise. Romania, led by King Ferdinand I of the House of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, abandoned its neutrality and joined the Central Powers. The Romanian elite, sharing blood ties with Germany's royal family, saw opportunity in victory. Just as Italy had joined the Allies in our own timeline, Romania now played its own opportunistic hand, but this time on the winning side. In this altered world, Lenin never returned to Russia. Without German backing, there was no sealed train, no revolution in Petrograd, no Bolshevik uprising. The great communist experiment that would one day shape half the planet simply never happened. Instead, Russia limped forward under a weakened Tsar, a monarchy bruised but still intact. Small waves of unrest swept through the factories and the countryside, led by reformists and weary soldiers, but none of it reached revolutionary proportions.
The storm of ideology that once promised to remake the 20th century never broke over Europe at all. By mid-1915, the Eastern Front bled into stalemate and exhaustion. Finally, both sides agreed to meet in Warsaw. The resulting Treaty of Warsaw redrew Eastern Europe in Germany's favor. But victory did not bring unity. The old rivalry between Prussia and Austria, buried only for the sake of war, now resurfaced in full. At the center of the dispute stood Poland. Vienna envisioned a greater Habsburg Union, in which a revived Polish kingdom would join Austria and Hungary as an equal member, a tri-monarchy bound by mutual interest and shared governance. Berlin, however, saw Poland as spoils of conquest. General Ludendorff demanded that nearly 19,000 square miles of Polish land be annexed directly into the Reich, with millions of Poles and Jews expelled to make room for German settlers, a brutal vision known as the Polish border strip plan. The two visions collided. Diplomats argued for months, and the result satisfied no one. Poland became an independent kingdom in name, but in reality a German puppet, its throne awarded to Frederick Augustus III of Saxony, a Catholic monarch acceptable to both sides. Austria, bitter over the betrayal, refused to join Germany's economic project Mitteleuropa, marking the first crack in the Central Powers' triumphant alliance.
Elsewhere, the geopolitical chessboard continued to shift. Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine were reorganized as German protectorates. The United Baltic Duchy, Crimea, Georgia, and the Tatar Republic emerged as semi-autonomous client states ruled by German aristocrats and military governors. The empire of the Kaiser now stretched, in influence if not in flag, from the Rhine to the Caucasus. Finland declared complete independence, its destiny no longer tied to Russia or Germany, while Romania, rewarded for its loyalty, seized Bessarabia. The Ottoman Empire, weakened yet still breathing, created a puppet Armenian state, while Austria fully integrated Bosnia and Herzegovina, turning the once volatile region into a permanent Habsburg province. Serbia was erased from the map. Its lands were divided between Bulgaria and Greece, with a small puppet remnant governed by Austrian officers. Montenegro, too, lost its sovereignty, its coastline absorbed into Austria's expanding Adriatic dominion. The end of France was not brought by invasion alone, but by despair. The Treaty of Frankfurt, the formal recognition of French defeat, shattered national pride and set the country ablaze. Paris once again became a city of barricades. Monarchists, imperialists, syndicalists, and republicans turned the boulevards into battlegrounds. A civil war erupted, mirroring the chaos that the real-world Russia would later face. For a time, the syndicalists, radical workers inspired by the idea of direct labor control, seized power. They promised equality, order, and revenge. But to Berlin and London, their victory looked like the rebirth of revolution itself. Fearing the spread of socialism, Germany and Britain, once enemies, became uneasy allies. Their forces landed on the French coast in joint intervention, repeating history's great irony. The same coalition that crushed Napoleon a century earlier now marched to crush a Red France. In the colonies, chaos reigned. African garrisons declared loyalty to competing governments. Rebellions flared in Indochina. Italy, eager to prove itself as Germany's southern partner, invaded from the Alps, annexing Savoy, Tunisia, and Corsica. By 1917, France was broken beyond recognition. The resulting Treaty of Versailles, not the one we know, but a cruel reversal of it, ended the Second French Republic. France's empire was divided like carrion. Britain, Germany, and Italy partitioned its colonies among themselves. Algeria remained under French administration, but the rest of Africa was stripped away. Tunisia became a joint Anglo-Italian condominium, Corsica fell under Italian rule, and Indochina was transferred to German oversight. In return, Britain recognized the full extent of German gains in Europe and focused on consolidating its Middle Eastern domain. The British Empire annexed Persia, creating an unbroken imperial highway from the Mediterranean to India. In Central Africa, the Belgian Congo was split three ways: Britain, Germany, and Portugal each taking a share. The Germans now controlled the Great Central Corridor from Cameroon to Tanganyika, a vast colonial bloc the world called Middle Africa. Farther east, Japan, unwilling to challenge the victorious Kaiser, returned Qingdao to Germany,
while Britain handed over French Indochina to complete the realignment of Asia's colonial balance. Out of ruin rose reaction. In 1921, the conservative intellectual Charles Maurras, leader of Action Française, seized power. His movement rejected both liberalism and socialism, calling for a return to order, to God, monarchy, and tradition. Backed by Germany and the Catholic Church, Maurras restored the Orleans monarchy, crowning King Philippe VII as constitutional monarch. France was reborn, but it was not the same France. It was devout, disciplined, and vengeful. Its tricolor flag was replaced with royal white and blue. Its parliament was dissolved. Its people, weary of defeat, embraced nationalism dressed in divine right. Emperor Karl of Austria hailed Philippe VII as a brother monarch and ally. Though beneath the cordial smiles, both rulers knew that resentment still burned. For the French, humiliation had merely been transformed into patience. Revenge would take time, decades perhaps, but it would come. By 1923, the Ottoman Empire, technically one of the victors, was collapsing from within. The empire's diversity had become its undoing. The Young Turk movement had failed to unite its peoples, and the authoritarian rule of the three pashas had plunged Anatolia into chaos.
Massacres of Armenians, Assyrians, and Arabs shattered any remaining legitimacy. Across the deserts and mountains, rebellion spread like wildfire. The Hashemites, heroes of the Arab revolt, rose once more, this time with open British support. Kurdish, Arab, and Armenian independence movements exploded into the vacuum, while the great powers circled like vultures. Greece, Bulgaria, and Italy invaded Anatolia simultaneously, each seeking to claim its share of the dying empire. But their ambitions collided. The Greeks and Bulgarians soon fought each other for dominance. The Glucksburg dynasty of Greece, tied by family to Kaiser Wilhelm II, secured Germany's support. The Kaiser saw in Greece a loyal ally guarding his southern flank, and, more importantly, a protector of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, the great artery of German power through the Near East. Meanwhile, Romania invaded Bulgaria from the north, forcing Sofia to surrender vast territories to both its neighbors. By 1924, Greek armies, heavily equipped by Berlin, controlled much of western Anatolia. Yet the victory was hollow. The once mighty Ottoman Empire disintegrated into chaos, and its collapse redrew the entire Middle East, not as a region of liberation, but as a chessboard for imperial dominance. By 1926, Europe's attention shifted to the east. While Germany consolidated its grip over the continent, France, now a Catholic nationalist monarchy under King Philip VII and Prime Minister Charles Maurras, sought a new crusade to restore its prestige.
Their eyes turned to the Holy Land, the eternal symbol of Christian victory and sacrifice. That year, the French army, backed by monarchist volunteers from across Europe, invaded Palestine. The Ottoman Empire, long weakened and collapsing under its own weight, offered little resistance. The campaign, justified in Paris as a holy mission to reclaim the sacred soil, was as much political theater as it was conquest. But it worked. Within months, the French tricolor flew over Jerusalem, igniting euphoria across Catholic Europe. The French forces carved their path through chaos, forming alliances with Assyrians, Cilician Armenians, and Greeks in the Levant, Christian minorities who had endured decades of persecution. Together, they battled against the remnants of Turkish, Kurdish, and Arab militias. By 1928, the Ottoman state had finally disintegrated beyond repair. In Anatolia, the Turkish nationalist leader Mustafa Kemal Atatürk tried desperately to rally what remained of his people. He declared the creation of a modern Republic of Turkey inspired by Western reforms. But history, in this world, was against him. Lacking Soviet or Allied aid, his forces faced overwhelming opposition from German and French-backed coalitions. The Turkish War of Independence, so successful in our timeline, ended here in utter defeat. The Treaty of Tyre, signed in 1929, redrew the map of the Middle East. Delegates from every great power gathered to divide the fallen Ottoman carcass.
There were bold proposals for a vast Armenian kingdom, stretching from the Black Sea to Lake Van, the first since the days of Tigranes the Great in 95 BC, but Germany and France rejected it. They feared a united Armenia might threaten their spheres of influence. Instead, Armenia was expanded deep into eastern Anatolia, achieving its greatest size in 2 millennia. South of it, native Cilician Armenians and Greeks established the Kingdom of Cilicia, a French protectorate, reviving the medieval legacy of the Crusader states. Greece, rewarded for its loyalty to the Kaiser, gained control over much of western Anatolia, including Ionia and Pontus, realizing, at last, its centuries-old dream of the Megali idea, the rebirth of a greater Hellenic realm. Italy, though a German ally, was not forgotten. Rome received Lycia, Pisidia, and Pamphylia in southwestern Anatolia, carving its own Mediterranean empire on the ruins of Ottoman rule. The Assyrians, supported by French military advisors, achieved something unimaginable in real history, a vast Christian state stretching from Mosul to the Mediterranean, protected under French authority. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was formally re-established, administered directly by France, symbolizing a new age of the cross. The move electrified public opinion at home and transformed Maras into a national hero. But victory came at a price. The Arabs, divided and bitter, received little more than a consolation prize. Southern Mesopotamia and Syria were given to the Hashemite dynasty, divided into the kingdoms of Hejaz, Syria, and Mesopotamia.
To the Arab world, this was a betrayal, a mirror of Italy's frustration after the Great War in our own reality. The Hashemites ruled, but they ruled over resentment. In the north, Greece, Armenia, and Georgia formed an alliance, eventually falling under the German sphere of influence. The Middle East had become a patchwork of monarchies and protectorates, Christian, Muslim, and nationalist, each backed by foreign powers. At the heart of it all, the Turks were left with only a rump state in central Anatolia, surrounded by enemies on all sides. While the Middle East burned, Austria-Hungary, or rather the newly renamed Austro-Hungarian-Croatian Empire, stood as Europe's most surprising survivor. Victorious, intact, and reformed, it had defied the doom of history. Emperor Karl I, spared from exile and illness, emerged as one of Europe's most respected statesmen. Realizing that survival required adaptation, he initiated sweeping reforms. Contrary to popular belief, Karl never intended to create a full imperial federation. The idea of a 12-nation parliament, inspired by President Wilson's 14 points, had only been a desperate wartime proposal. Instead, Karl drew inspiration from a circle of Croatian intellectuals, Noah Zvonimir Pelek, Ivo Pilar, Stjepan Šitarjević, and General Luka Schnarek. Together, they envisioned a practical reform, the creation of a third crown, representing the South Slavs. Thus was born the Kingdom of Croatia-Slavonia, incorporating Istria, Dalmatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Slovenia into a unified crown under Habsburg rule.
The empire's official name changed to the Austro-Hungarian-Croatian Monarchy, and Karl was crowned 3 times, in Vienna, Budapest, and Zagreb, each ceremony reinforcing the unity of its 3 nations. Even István Tisza, Hungary's influential prime minister, who had once resisted any Slavic autonomy, publicly admitted his nation's past mistakes toward Croatia, declaring, "We have sinned against our brothers. It is time to make peace." Political, military, and economic reforms soon followed. The empire modernized its railways, factories, and education systems, reducing corruption and uplifting the Slavic provinces. Army Slavic, once a battlefield improvisation, became the official auxiliary language of the Common Army, breaking centuries of linguistic division. The military underwent a complete transformation, introducing tanks, aircraft, and a modern navy. Austria-Hungary emerged as one of Europe's premier powers, rivaled only by Germany and Britain, but it no longer wished to be German's shadow. Gradually, Karl distanced Vienna from Berlin, opening trade with Britain and the United States, refusing to join Mitteleuropa. Austria's policy became clear: neutral in ambition, imperial in dignity. While the Central Powers reshaped Europe and the Middle East, the rest of the world moved on. The great game between Russia and Britain continued in Asia, though Russia's power had diminished. A fragile Tsarist regime, still propped up by Germany, struggled to control Siberia and Central Asia. In China, civil war raged endlessly. With no Soviet Union to back the communists, the revolutionaries collapsed early. China fractured into a dozen warlord states, each aligning with a different empire: Germany in the north, Britain in the south, Japan along the coast, and Russia in the interior. None desired a unified China. Division suited them all. Tibet, meanwhile, became a British protectorate, turning the Himalayas into a buffer zone against Russian influence. Japan, rising rapidly under the Anglo-Japanese alliance, expanded across the Pacific and East Asia. Without American interventionism, Tokyo became the dominant naval and industrial power of the Pacific, rivaling the British Empire itself. In Spain, the 1930s brought familiar chaos. The monarchy fell once more into civil war, but without Soviet or communist support, the conflict fractured into a dozen competing factions: Democrats, anarchists, separatists, nationalists, and 4 rival monarchist houses: Alfonsists, Carlists, Hohenzollernists, and Habsburgists. France, ever eager to expand its influence, intervened to support Catalonia and the Balearic Islands, while Britain covertly aided the Democratic coalition. By 1934, France formally annexed Catalonia and Majorca, a quiet but momentous territorial gain. Following this, France withdrew from Middle Europa, declaring full independence from German influence. The Kaiser, aging and frail, could no longer respond decisively. The once unbreakable unity of the Central Powers began to fade.
By 1939, the world once again stood on the edge. National rivalries, colonial tensions, and unresolved ambitions simmered across continents. Then came the spark. During a royal tour of Canada, King George VI was assassinated in Montreal. The shot rang out from an open carriage, a single bullet that shattered the peace of the Imperial century. The assassin was never caught, but the culprit was clear. French agents had stirred Quebecois nationalism, inciting rebellion against British rule. The Quebec Rebellion erupted overnight, plunging Canada into chaos. Britain declared war on France within a week. But this time, alliances were no longer simple. The world divided into 3 colossal factions: the Great Coalition, led by Great Britain, Japan, Portugal, Democratic Spain, Turkey, and their Chinese allies; the Imperial Brotherhood, a counter-alliance of France and Russia, joined by Brazil, Bulgaria, Assyria, Cilicia, Quebec, and the Spanish Carlists, monarchist, anti-British, and vengeful; and the Central Powers, led once again by Germany, supported by Italy, Greece, Argentina, Romania, Armenia, Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, the new Baltic Duchy, and Georgia. In 1939, representatives of Germany, Italy, and Greece met secretly in Königsberg, signing a classified pact, the Treaty of Kingsburg, outlining their plans for a second division of the world. The treaty envisioned the partition of Austria, Anatolia, and Britain's African colonies, in the event of a new global war. Austria, under Emperor Karl, remained neutral, determined to preserve internal peace. Yet even neutrality carried ambition. Quietly, Austria funneled support to the Habsburgist faction in Spain, dreaming of restoring its dynastic influence and reclaiming northern Italy and Poland if war ever engulfed Europe again. The world teetered on the brink of a second Great War, one more complex, more fragmented, and far more unpredictable than the first. And so history's great irony came full circle. The war meant to end all wars had only created a century of them. If you want, I can now continue into World War II in the Kaiserzeit timeline, showing T.